All right. Hey, Freddie, welcome back.
It's been a hot minute. In fact, I think it's been a hot 2 years since I last spoke with you.
Yeah, we looked it up. You know what? It was exactly 2 years ago because it was December 21st,
Get out.
2021. Yeah. So almost to the day. So welcome back. Do you remember what we were talking about 2 years ago?
We were talking about the second book, They Canceled the DJ.
Okay, I don't recall it. Why don't you give us a refresher? We might as well cover everything while you're here. What was that book?
Absolutely.
What was that book about?
Yeah, that was about a nationally syndicated radio DJ who committed the cardinal sin of all radio disc jockeys by falling in love with somebody he met at a radio station event. Long story short, he ends up getting dumped on stage at a concert by said, not Mrs. Right, but Mrs. Right now, in front of thousands of screaming fans for the world's most famous pop star. And then the rest of the story follows a series of unfortunate events as he tries to avenge his embarrassment.
Did this really happen to you?
It did not, but it's one of those based on an actual event. So I had a friend of mine whose name is Tyler, and he was at Austin City Limits, and a band that shall remain nameless, whose lead singer actually scooped up a woman from underneath him. So he was like, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna get this lady's number. Oh yeah, this is this is gonna happen. This is gonna happen. I'm gonna score a date. I'm gonna date this woman, and we're hitting it off backstage at this concert. And then what happens? This barefoot musician swoops in, and because he's a musician at ACL, ends up stealing my friend's woman. And they as in my coworkers at the time, were like, yeah, that's another book, Freddie. That's another book. And I go, you know what? That is. So let's take this to the worst case scenario, and then take the worst case scenario and make the guy's life an even more of a living hell.
Well, I'm sorry I don't remember it, but 2 years ago and 500 interviews later, it's back in the fog there someplace. How many books do you have published at this point?
3.
Three, okay. All right. What started you on the path to writing books? Because I know that you do a podcast and you were doing something else as well, right?
Last we spoke, I was in transition. I was leaving corporate radio, so now I'm doing my own thing.
Okay.
Yeah. So what really got me into writing was, it was really more of a dare for my kids. So the first book, you and I spoke about the second book, but the first book was inspired by a dare. My kids were, we were at Barnes and Noble, a wild Saturday night for a suburban family in America, and they're like, "Daddy, you should write a book." I go, "Huh, maybe I should, but I don't know what it should be about." And so the allure, the sort of the honeymoon phase of, oh, Daddy's writing a book, that wore off after about 5 minutes. And so I had to make sure that what I was going to write about was going to be something that I was engaged in, something I found fascinating. And so that was how I came up with When America Fell Silent, which was which the book itself is completely different from any of the other two. They're all three are standalone books, and they're all completely different from one another. And so this one follows the story of a first daughter who goes ballistic after her parents are assassinated by an American commie on Inauguration Day. And so, yeah, she installs herself as president / dictator, overthrows the government, and all hell breaks loose. And yeah, that's that story.
Well, I kind of like the idea that you're writing in all different sort of genres and different styles, because a lot of authors get into a pigeonhole for one particular style and they don't break out, or they're afraid to break out of it because it's what they're known for. It's what their publisher says that's what sells. And, it's like movie franchises. They do one, it's a hit, they'll do 20 more. And they're afraid to sort of break away from the mold. So I think with things being independent, are you self-published?
I am.
Okay. So you can basically call your own shots. You can just sort of do what you want. And I think that's great.
Yeah, it was sort of I think with the third book, I'll probably at some point write a sequel. I'm a little jaded with the writing world right now, seeing as how the publisher for the third one dropped me, and the publisher for the second book, they canceled the DJ. They went under, and so I've got to republish both of those books independently. So right now I've got some, there's some there's some tension right there. So I'll eventually start writing again once I feel like I'm in the mood. Plus I'm doing my business thing, and so that's not. I'm channeling the creativity in other forms, and eventually I'll get back to where I can sort of create an environment for myself that I could churn out a 250, 300-page book.
Let's get to the new one here. The new one is called Allow Me to Ruin Your Christmas.
Yes.
Nice title. Tell us a little about this one.
Well, this one follows two hideous creatures. I don't call them men, but one is a college age kid. The other is a middle-aged podcast host. The college kid is in love, infatuated with this podcaster until he finds out that said podcaster is having an affair with his mom. But that's not really the issue. The issue comes when he finds out that the podcaster is responsible for his dad's death. And so it's a plot of revenge. But there's so many different twists and turns that by the end of the story, the person who you were probably cheering for at the beginning will not end up being that person. You will end up most likely cheering for somebody else. Or you might end up saying, wow, the author needs medication, like somebody who actually listened to the audiobook told me. But I take that as a compliment.
Okay, so where does the Christmas part come in?
It is set during the holiday season in Houston, Texas.
Oh, all right. Okay.
Yes.
Was there any real life inspiration for this book?
There are elements of real life experiences in the book, but did they influence any of the actual plot? No.
We've got just about 5 minutes, and we've been skirting around the word podcast during this whole interview, so I want to just bring that up, since we both sort of do that. And we actually both came from FM radio and moved to podcasting. So
Yep.
I want to know how you're finding it. You weren't doing the podcast when you were on last time, right?
I started my own podcast because I was voluntold to start a podcast when I was in corporate radio. So that was a different show, and it belonged to the corporate overlord.
Oh, okay.
And that was a podcast about books. And so I had started that one at the end of 2020. And I had fun with the long form conversations. I thought it was fun, but that podcast obviously went away when I left my previous employer.
Okay. So the one that you're doing now is about what?
So the one I'm doing now is focused on Houston, Texas. So it's called Cruise Through HTX. And so it's very hyper focused on the city of Houston, entrepreneurs, businesses, organizations, events, even that Houstonians that I want Houstonians to learn about, and these are people who you don't necessarily see on the nightly news ad nauseum. In Houston, I'm sure. You're in Vegas, last I remember.
Yep, still here.
Yeah, so you probably see the same people on the nightly news over and over again. And just like Houston, Vegas is a large town with a lot of people who are doing some really awesome things. So why not put a spotlight on these people, these individuals, these businesses, these organizations, these events that might not get the necessary love, but shining a spotlight on them.
Do you actually go to them and do a journalistic report?
I do go to their location. I also do remote remote interviews from the home studio as well. So it's a little bit of both.
Is it video or just audio only?
It was video, but it's mainly audio. It's audio focused.
Okay. So it's like a feature magazine sort of podcast about
twice a
us.
week.
Twice a week. Okay. How do you find the podcasting industry, generally speaking?
Generally speaking, and this is where I really geek out, because I'm also a podcast agency owner by default, because I couldn't find a job in the real world. So I'm like, well, I looked at myself in the mirror, was like, well, Freddie, 400 applications, 55 some odd rejections, a handful of interviews that did not go well. You're hired. And I hired myself and started my own company. So I'm now helping people start their own shows. And when I say I geek out, I'm just all over it, man, because people like us, we can go and help businesses and organizations launch their own shows, because these are people who may be tired of the old world and the 5-minute long hit on a traditional media outlet that maybe nobody really heard or saw. And so they can start their own show and they can talk about their thing, and they could become their own version of CNBC or E! News or the Business Channel, or their own version of, I don't know, Cleveland Clinic Radio, if they even have a radio station, but I'm just throwing that out there. So they could become their own sort of news company or media company. And through my agency, that's what I help them to do, help them with strategizing, coming up with names, coming up with episode ideas, guest interviews, guest appearances, the whole nine, because decentralization is where it's at, baby.
You charge a fee for people to come to you and you help them set up?
For their own show, yeah.
Okay. How's that going?
I love it. And I've got 2 flagship clients right now, which is the Rose Breast Center of Excellence. They have served over 1 million people. Yeah, a little over 1 million people since 1986. They have their show. So part of where I integrate my old world institutional background is in the sort of PT Barnumizing a show. So my version of that for the Rose was doing 31 straight episodes for Breast Cancer Awareness Month, which to my knowledge has never been done in the history of podcasting. Was it a lot of work? Hell yeah. Was it worth it? Hell yeah. It was amazing. And we increased listenership by 700%.
Wow.
Yeah, it was impressive.
Well, I think on that, we're going to have to wind this down. Thanks for coming back on the show. Your latest book is called Allow Me to Ruin Your Christmas. My guest is Freddy Cruz. Do you have a website that you want to give out?
Sure, and I appreciate that. SpekePodcasting.com is where you can go to learn all about what I'm doing. I've got the free audiobook version of Allow Me to Ruin Your Christmas wherever you get your podcasts. Because again, as I mentioned, I was dropped by the publisher, and so we're sort of scrambling to find a place to get the book out to where you can get the actual copy. But in the meantime, you can listen for free, narrated by yours truly, and you can also catch up with me on all the socials.
Okay. Well, thanks for coming back. It was nice catching up with you, and best of luck with everything you're doing.
Really appreciate the invite back to the show, Doug.